The old Ford coughed, its headlights cutting through the thick fog like dull knives. Sara gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The road stretched before her, a black ribbon disappearing into the swirling grey. She was late. Far too late. Should have taken the highway, she thought, berating herself. The silence in the car was unnerving, broken only by the rhythmic swoosh of the windshield wipers. Each swipe did little to clear the ever-thickening fog. It clung to the trees lining the road, twisting them into grotesque shapes. Shapes that seemed to watch her, to follow her. Sara shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. It was more than the cold seeping into the car. A prickle of unease ran down her spine. This road, always desolate, seemed different tonight, menacing, as if something watched from the swirling mist. She switched on the radio, hoping for a distraction, a human voice to break the oppressive silence. Static greeted her. She fiddled with the dial, a burst of music, then static again. With a sigh, she settled on a barely there talk show, clinging to the murmur of voices like a lifeline. The voices on the radio crackled, distant and distorted. Sara strained to hear, catching snippets of conversation, vanished without a trace. Legends say, never seen again. A shiver ran down her spine. Just stories, she told herself. Urban legends whispered around campfires, but the stories fueled by the isolation and the fog wormed their way into her mind. Stories of travelers lost on lonely roads, vanishing without a trace. Stories whispered in hushed tones, meant to chill and frighten. Stories that felt all too real now. Sara tried to shake off the unease. It was just the fog, the lateness of the hour, playing tricks on her mind. She focused on the road, on the faint white lines that marked her path. They were reassuring, a tangible connection to the world beyond the fog. The radio crackled again, the voices fading in and out. Aki, be careful. The hitchhiker. Never look him in the eye. Sara's breath hitched. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. It was just a story, just a story. Then she saw him, a figure standing by the side of the road, shrouded in the swirling mist. A hitchhiker. He was tall and thin, almost gaunt. His clothes, dark and nondescript, seemed to blend into the fog itself. He held up a hand, thumb extended. Sara hesitated. She'd never picked up a hitchhiker before. Especially not on a night like this, on a road like this. But something about the figure, the way he stood so still and silent in the mist, tugged at her. A sense of pity, perhaps, or maybe just a desperate need to break the suffocating solitude. She slowed the car, pulling to a stop a few feet ahead of the figure. He moved closer, his face still hidden in the shadows of the fog. Sara rolled down the window a fraction, just enough to be heard. "Do you need a ride?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. She instantly regretted it. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The figure leaned closer, and for the first time, Sara saw his face. His face was pale, almost as white as the fog itself. His eyes were dark, unnaturally so, like two black holes in the pale canvas of his face. He didn't smile. He just stared at her, his gaze intense, unsettling. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rasp that seemed to slither into the car, wrapping around Sara like a cold wind. He slid into the passenger seat, bringing with him the chill of the night and the unsettling scent of damp earth. Sara shivered, trying to ignore the prickle of unease that ran down her spine. She told herself it was just the cold, the strangeness of the situation, but deep down a primal fear stirred within her. "I'm Jake," he said, his voice barely audible above the low hum of the engine. "Sara!" she replied, her voice tight with tension. She put the car in gear, her hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Section 5. Tales of the Lost. "This road," Jake began, his voice a low murmur, almost lost in the sound of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. "They say it's haunted." Sara's heart skipped a beat. She forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Haunted? By whom?" Jake turned his head, those dark, fathomless eyes fixing her. "By Those who lost their way, he whispered, his voice barely a breath. Those who vanished into the fog, never to be seen again. He launched into a story then, a tale whispered in hushed tones, a story of a young couple, their car breaking down on a foggy night just like this. They vanished, he said, swallowed by the fog, leaving no trace but whispered rumors and the chilling echo of their last, desperate cries. Sara listened, her fear a living thing now, coiling in the pit of her stomach. She tried to dismiss it as just a story, a way to pass the time, but the fog, the isolation of the road, and Jake's eerie calmness made it all too real, too close to home. Section 6. A glimpse in the mirror. She stole a glance at Jake in the rearview mirror. His face, caught in the pale glow of the dashboard lights, seemed different now. Sharper, more defined, almost predatory, and his eyes, those endlessly black eyes, seemed to bore into her, seeing her deepest fears. Sara quickly averted her gaze, focusing on the road ahead. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing in on the car, suffocating. The headlights cut through the swirling grey, revealing nothing but an endless wall of mist. Don't you ever wonder, Jake's voice, close to her ear now, startled her, if the fog is hiding something, or someone. Sara gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy and intense. It's just fog, she said, her voice thin and reedy. Is it, Jake whispered, a hint of amusement in his voice? Or is it a curtain hiding us from something, or something from us? Section 7. Engine's death rattle. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Sara's heart pounded against her ribs. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, his voice disturbingly calm. I don't know," Sara stammered, her voice trembling. She tried the ignition again. Nothing, just the insistent clicking of the starter motor. Panic clawed at her throat. She risked another glance at Jake in the rearview mirror. His reflection was gone. The space where he sat was empty. She spun around, heart hammering in her chest. The passenger seat was empty. A cold hand closed around her wrist, stopping her heart. She screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that was swallowed by the fog. Turning back, she found herself staring into Jake's face, but it was different now. Twisted, grotesque, a mockery of a human face. Section 8. The Endless Loop. Sara slammed her foot on the accelerator. Even though the engine was dead, she didn't care. She just needed to get away from him, from this car, from this road. But the car remained stubbornly still, trapped in the grip of the fog. Trapped with him, she fumbled for the door handle, her fingers slipping on the cold metal. "There's no escape," Jake's voice rasped, close to her ear, sending chills down her spine. "You're one of us now, lost in the fog." She finally managed to wrench the door open and scrambled out into the thick, swirling mist. She didn't look back. She just ran, her lungs burning, her legs screaming in protest. The fog swirled around her, thick and disorienting. She couldn't see, she couldn't breathe. She stumbled, falling to her hands and knees, the rough asphalt scraping her skin. Section 9. Trapped in the shadows. She looked up, her vision blurry, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the swirling mist she saw it. The car, her car. It was parked a few feet away, its headlights cutting through the fog like accusing eyes. And standing beside it, his tall, gaunt figure barely visible through the swirling grey, was Jake. He was watching her, his pale face expressionless, those dark eyes boring into her soul. He smiled then, a slow, chilling smile that stretched his lips but didn't reach his eyes. And in that moment, Sara understood. She wasn't going to escape. She was trapped, just like all the others who had vanished on this road, lost in the fog, forever bound to the shadows and whispers of this haunted stretch of asphalt. As the fog closed in around her, swallowing her whole, she saw his face one last time. His features were gone, replaced by something inhuman, something ancient and evil, and in his eyes she saw her fate reflected. A terrifying eternity lost in the fog, a prisoner of the haunted road.